Margarita Santa Caterina, and here with me today I have Dr. Joseph Contaguglia with the Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. He's a clinical professor of environmental health sciences, and we're going to discuss the community management of radiological events. And with me to join in this discussion, I have Ann Anderson and Chrissy Skevington, Tom Augustin. And in light of current events, I just would like to ask you some questions. Okay, great. Well, let's see. On any given day, what type of radiological events could be possible or likely to see here in my community?
That's an interesting question, and it begs a very long answer, but we won't do that. Instead, what we'll just take a look at the range of some of the things that can happen, because this is a new age. Okay, the world of our grandparents is long past, and so certainly for the last half century, one of the potentials that you have is that of a nuclear detonation. Weapons do now exist, and there are nations who are attempting to build new weapons as we speak, and malfunctions can happen. Also, the risk of belligerency is probably higher today than it was back in the 50s and 40s when it was last used. So certainly you could have the belligerent use of a nuclear weapon capable of giving a yield. On the other hand, the other extreme of belligerency is something simple like a radiation dispersal device or a radiation exposure device, which are technically very, very simple. An RDD, radiation dispersal device, is an explosive which has incorporated into it a core of contaminating material, and that's used by a terrorist to terrify a population and to embarrass a government. It's been used in the past. The simplicity of it, you really can't get much simpler than that. But it can cause a great deal of trouble if you have a police force, if you have responding fire and emergency, aren't aware of what they're supposed to do, because then lives will be lost from the explosive effect that then can be blamed on a government, can discredit a government. And probably here in beautiful Louisiana, on the banks of the Mississippi, that would be the most likely thing we might expect to see in a world where there are terrorists with technical capabilities. However, we don't have to rely on belligerency to get ourselves in trouble. Men are perfectly capable of doing without that, as we've just seen recently as we look across the Pacific to Japan. So in a world which is hungry for energy, in a world where more energy is going to be required to be able to sustain the lifestyle which we're enjoying here and people enjoy around the world, we are moving from a petroleum-based economy into a nuclear-based world. So there are going to be more nuclear reactors. Those reactors are going to require servicing. They're going to require fuel. Waste is going to have to be removed. And so right in the areas where people, this ever more urban population is living, we are going to have more reactors, more fuel, more transportation, more likelihood of accidents, and that's got to be a part of what our world is going to have to look like. And by the way, anytime you have something like that happening, belligerency can still stick its nose on in, and you could wind up with the problems of the transportation system itself becoming a target. So, truthfully, as we walk into a new era, you're not surprised that there are things we're going to have to get used to, just as we had to get used to many things in the petroleum era. I'm sure the great-great-great-great-great-grandparents never thought about a tanker going on the rocks, or they never thought about an oil well in the middle of the sea catching fire and following the Gulf of Mexico. These are all parts of the previous technology. We now have to be capable of looking ahead into what tomorrow is going to look like.
Dr. Contaguglia, what are the different kinds of radiation?
Oh my heavens. We could talk for a very long time about that, but we won't. one could say that there are a number of different types of radiation. We normally talk about them as particles, alpha, beta, gamma. Let's start with gamma. That is the high energy particle wave, capable of going through all manners of lead and concrete and such. And that's what we very often think of when we think of radiation. Certainly, if one were to talk about something like a nuclear weapons detonation, someone standing out in the open, like the turning on of a light, might be exposed to total body radiation from gamma. Now, when I was a kid, I often thought that the gamma ray was the most dangerous of all. But guess what? There are other types which are important to us too. The beta radiation is an electron, if you want to think of it, a positron. The alpha particle is a big, heavy particle. It's the nucleus of a helium atom. And these have much more impact, much more ability to do damage than a gamma ray. A field of alpha particles has 20 times the ability of injuring tissue than gamma rays do. Now, if I hold up this piece of paper, that's going to block beta, that's going to block alpha. And you say, all right, so why are you even worried about that? Because if we have a contaminant which somehow manages to enter the human body by inhalation, by ingestion, by absorption through a skin or mucous membranes, now that contaminating particle, which is emitting radioactive energy, then comes into the human body and can become incorporated in the human body. And then that alpha particle is causing damage 20 times greater than a gamma ray, for example, that you might have run on into in the total body radiation. Now, those particles also can be gamma emitters. But in our own mind, then, we have to be thinking about radiation in terms of the radiation from a source where we were being exposed to the radioactive waves, the energy. But we also have to be worried about the particles themselves, the contaminants, the fallout, which are capable of being inhaled and that sort of thing. So when we think about radiation, then, we need to be thinking about all of those aspects of it, because ultimately our role is to try and make sure that we protect ourselves, we protect our children, we protect our houses as much as possible of not becoming involved in exposing sensitive parts of our tissues and such to radiation. Now we could go on and on and on and on, but hopefully that gives you the idea. There is the business of worrying about the contaminating particles themselves, and then there is the worry about the radiation. All that makes sense. Contamination and exposure.
Well, Dr. Contiguglia, you mentioned protecting yourself and protecting families. How can individuals and families protect themselves from a radiological event?
That's a very good question, Tom. And it beggars the issue of, for this jurisdiction and for this particular risk, what do we need to do? After all, we're going to do certain things for an earthquake, and we're going to do certain things for a flood. Well, the risk from radiation can come from many things. We could have an RDB set off outside by a terrorist, and there would be specific things that we would do. We could have an earthquake which results in mechanical failure at a power plant, and the consequences, that's happened up in Daiichi. We could have a big old truck go there on the I-10 that we see there in the background, turn on over and dump a whole 18,000 pounds of stuff into the middle of the road, and we deal with that differently too, okay? And so part of it is our being in tune, if you will. The ancient Greeks would like that, being in tune with the rest of the universe. That personal stoicism of knowing what the resources are and what the plans are in a given area are important. If we live within 10 miles of a nuclear power plant, one thing which is done worldwide is making sure that people have access to iodine tablets. And the reason that they do that is because if we had violation of the core of a reactor, one of the things that would be released would be iodine-131. Now, you'd be surprised to hear it, but most human beings have a little bit of a deficiency in iodine. It's just the way the metabolism works, which means that were iodine to become available because a wave of radioactive iodine contaminant was available, that might be absorbed into the thyroid. Now, if I-131 dose is absorbed into a thyroid, there are consequences. We use iodine-131 medically to be able to ablate thyroids, to destroy thyroids, and it'll do the job, okay? So one of the things that we try to do in protection of that, first of all, try not to be there. That's always a very good answer. But the second piece is, if we have people at specific risk or they're liable to be there, if they did take the iodine, for example, for an adult, you'd be talking about a 130 milligram dose that you take once a day. That fills up the thyroid and it's going, I have all the iodine I need and I don't need any more. And so you will minimize the absorption from an environment. Now, this has to be understood broadly. Anytime you have violation of a nuclear reactor core and such, there's going to be more things out there than just iodine, and we don't have magic tools against them. So you try not to be there, but iodine is certainly a threat because it will be targeted by a specific organ, and there will be consequences. So one of the tools we have is making sure that there is iodine available, and then people are taught to have it at the right time, to use it the right way. If people are smaller, they use less. Children aren't going to have the same dosages as parents would have had, and all the other potential complications. You can even have allergy issues. So here is where knowing what the local environment posed in terms of danger, having the tools to hand, knowing how to use them, would be a critical piece in terms of what we're going to do. Other things that we're going to need to do is, decision is going to have to be made, and that will be done generally by government, that for this group of population, do we stay here or do we run for it? And the do we run for it part, it has to do with, are the roads going to be open? Is there a place that people can go and receive shelter and receive support? And why that's important to us is, if we were told to evacuate, then we are going sometimes to circumstances which are fairly Spartan. Certainly those folks who had to leave the Daiichi area and go to school auditoriums or to gymnasiums and such found that a real challenge. It's the middle of the winter in Japan, and blankets, clothes, shoes, all sorts of things. So making sure that we had equipped ourselves with those tools which make sense in our environment would be important. And if we were going to stay, well, some of the things that would be important for us to think about is, what do we need to do to be able to carry out those requirements? Okay. It's a broad question which has to do partly with our own response. It has also to do with what response is going to be out there, because whether we stay in place or whether we evacuate, we're depending on an ongoing governmental process which is going to sustain us, and we need to fit on in with the overall picture, if any of that makes sense. I know, and we had talked about earlier on the issues of cars. And you see, here is where that in a time of crisis, sometimes you don't have electricity. Sometimes you don't have gasoline deliveries, and so the if we needed to be able to evacuate an area, the preservation of the capability of that automobile might be critical for us. So here would be where we'd say, okay, we got to worry about the car. Let's put it in the garage, close it on up, and it'll be there if we need it. And the gas that's in the tank, it'll be there if we need it. And if suddenly things change, and if you'll remember at Daiichi, they did change day by day. And decisions that had initially been made to shelter in place were changed. And the government said, better not do that anymore. You see, if we had then had that car as sheltered as possible, and the time to go is now, we'd then be asking the question, how? That's important because routes can be blocked, access can be blocked. So having connection with the channels of government information, even to the business of battery-powered radios or things which don't depend on the preservation of external power, might be critical for us, than of knowing the next step that we have to take.
So Dr. C, suppose community is telling us shelter in place.
Yes, ma'am.
What do I need to do in my house or my apartment to make sure that I'm safe in my shelter in place?
Yeah, and that's a great question to ask because it's important. A lot of people wouldn't think about that. Now, there's some very good guidance available for us through the Red Cross, through FEMA, and those kind of organizations worldwide. If what we're doing is sheltering from a dangerous outside world, for example, where there's dust with radiation on it, we'd want to get folks inside, and that might also mean taking a bath, taking a shower, getting the radiation off. Very often they'd say, put the clothes in a bag and put the bag outside, or so that ongoing exposure wasn't there. One of the issues about radiation is the effect is cumulative. So the radiation you were exposed to 2 hours ago is there, and the one of this hour, and the next hour, and the next hour. So getting the human separated from that contamination would be important. So it might be instructions about how to come in from the outside and how to prevent the outside from coming in. Close the fireplace damper, turn off the air conditioning system, block the wind under the door. Now, we can't use this in South Mississippi, but some places have basements. And the going to a sheltered area in the house, for example, like a basement, can make a lot of difference. The protection from outer radiation in a basement is about 200 times what you would find just sitting here and being exposed. That can make a lot of difference over time. In addition, there would be what needs to be there. And that's a little bit based on how long do we have to be here. There are some areas where the civil defense folks have said, plan for 3 days. And so 3 days, you would have food, hygienic things, clothes, medications. As we watch people walking on the street here, 1 in 3 of the adults we see is on a medication that if they can't get it within the next hours to days, life is at risk, or at least welfare. If we have kids, food, and the support things you need for kids. If it's cold, blankets. So we would be putting together the kit which is going to allow us to survive for the period of time that we need in our shelter in place, keeping ourselves as isolated as possible. By the way, bring in the cat. Don't let the cat go out. Bring in the dogs. And if you can think about it, if we went back to the 1950s, if you'll recall, while everybody was worried about thermonuclear war, we had shelters on almost every street in major cities, and they had stocks of food. Now back there, people were talking about having to be in a sheltered environment for up to months. Well, that's not what we're looking at today. But there would be things that we would want to be prepared for in terms of preparing our house, preserving our own welfare and ourselves, and in the event that government changed its mind, as has happened at Daiichi, and suddenly we now have to run for it, we would probably want to know what kind of a kit we have to bring with us. And so sturdy shoes might be a fair idea. Underwear is always nice. Sanitary materials, comb, soap, all the sort of things that allow us to get by. Do you use contact lenses? Might you need that sort of thing? Hearing aids. All our medications. All those sort of things very hard to replace on the road, yet it has to be something that you can carry. So, to a certain degree, depending on what the environment's going to demand of us, we will be knowing how we're going to secure the place we're going to be in, what we're going to do if that security is no longer possible, the kit we're going to bring with us, and quite important, the ability of getting the message, getting the communication, so that if a change is made, we will be aware of it.
Is it possible for a terrorist organization to acquire or make a nuclear bomb?
Unfortunately, that's an excellent question. We're going to find out, because they sure are trying. We also have rogue nations presently in the world who are trying very hard to develop nuclear weapons in contravention to the international treaties about that. And we certainly know that one of them already has a weapon capable of delivering a yield. So there is going to be, at the national level, a proliferation of nuclear weapons. Despite the fact there's some nations that had the common sense to think this was a really bad idea. South Africa, who just said, well, we don't want to be here, let's get rid of the doggone thing. And then you're going to have organizations like Al-Qaeda and others who will be looking to acquire these things, not just nuclear, also chemical and biological. But yes, that's possible. Technology can't be disinvented. Think about how old this technology is. It's 70 years old. And we have a world of very well-educated people from superb universities worldwide. So if people are trying hard to develop things which the technology is not that complex, they can certainly approach it. So you're going to have a race between two capabilities. The governments of the vast majority of nations on Earth are trying to suppress the unnecessary development of nuclear weapons, police agencies, and that sort of thing. On the other hand, there will be rogue states and there will be terrorists trying to develop this. In addition, sometimes states collapse. And so the old Soviet Union is no longer with us, but a lot of the weapons can't be located, including stuff as small as the little briefcase over here, capable of delivering a nuclear impact similar to Hiroshima of 20 kilotons. Those are out there. And by the way, some of these agencies of failed states had plenty of people working for them with expertise, and those people are out there too. So a long answer to a very simple question. They're trying, and they probably will. Our challenge then is going to be, for this new world, to have developed for our cities, for our communities, for our national infrastructure, for our local people, what we need to be able to come up with as plans, incorporating the best of technology with respect to the particular risks in a jurisdiction, the realities of the peril, the vulnerabilities, but also the capabilities, and come out with the right plan for the right place. And then we make this place as resilient as we can, and we train the people to know all that they need to do to be part of the team, because they are the people who have the major interest in self-rescue, and that's what our role has to be. As educators, that's the challenge that we face.
And so with all this effort that we're making as a nation to try to prepare, you say there's still no absolute defense.
Larita, that's true. That's true. because your challenge comes from a number of different directions. A friend of mine, when I was in the RAF, once said, well, if you're going to be a prize fighter, you've got to be able to take a punch. We have police agencies, we have government agencies, we have folks who are trying very hard to protect us from a dangerous world. And the danger isn't just a belligerency. Take a look. 3 weeks ago, if you were living in the plain north of Tokyo, you would certainly not have been dreaming that you were going to be in the center of attention of a group of well-intentioned educators half a world away today. We know one thing. The petroleum economy is going to be subsumed by a nuclear economy. We know that the generators and such a quarter and a half century ago are going to be replaced by other generators. Technologies are going to change. Graduate students are going to come up with new ideas. Some of these will work very well. Some of these may well be surprising. We know that to supply the materials for these in terms of fuel, stuff is going to have to be transported. It's going to be transported the same way we see it transported today. And truck accidents will happen and train accidents will happen. We know that waste is going to have to be gotten rid of, and there will be challenges there too. So with that in mind then, this is just one more piece of technology. And while Leonardo da Vinci would not have worried about air raid sirens, we have to be looking ahead to a world where for hundreds of years we're going to be using this new technology, and where we have to protect as much as possible the people whom we serve, the environment which we serve. And so everything from law enforcement to civil defense to environmental science has to take its next step in chasing this furry little creature that we call Homo sapiens along his latest adventure, and to keep him out of trouble as much as we can.
Thank you very much. I mean, I found this discussion very informative, and thanks for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you all for joining us as well. We are part of the South Central Public Health Partnership, and we have additional trainings on radiological events. You can visit our website at www.southcentralpartnership.org, and following this, you'll see a list of our trainings that you can join in and to learn more. Thank you.